What if the most important moment of your life looked like your worst? For 24-year-old Clara Peterson, it was a Tuesday. A cold, rain-slicked Tuesday that felt like 100 others. She was drowning in debt. Her mother's medical bills were a stack of venomous paper on her nightstand, and her feet were screaming after a 10-hour shift. The man who walked in wasn't a customer. He was a problem. Old, disheveled, smelling of rain and despair. He was the kind of person the world ignores. But Clara didn't. In the middle of her own storm, she offered a silent prayer for a stranger. She had no idea that her quiet whisper to God was about to echo back as a thunderous roar that would change everything. The neon sign of the Hummingbird Diner flickered, casting a sickly pink and blue glow on the wet asphalt of the parking lot. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, grease, and the quiet desperation of a late Tuesday night in Pittsburgh. For Clara Peterson, this was the soundtrack of her life. The clatter of cheap ceramic, the hiss of the grill, and the low murmur of the few remaining patrons were as familiar as her own heartbeat. Clara was a ghost in this place, gliding between tables with a coffee pot that felt heavier with each step. Her smile, once genuine, was now a carefully constructed mask she wore to protect what little energy she had left. At 24, she felt 40. Life had been a relentless grind since her mother, Sarah, had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder 2 years ago. The insurance barely covered a fraction of the experimental treatments, leaving Clara to work double shifts at the diner and take on odd cleaning jobs on her one day off. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was just after 10 p.m. when the bell above the door chimed weakly, announcing a new arrival. The man who shuffled in seemed to bring the misery of the storm with him. He was old, perhaps in his late 70s, with a threadbare coat soaked through to the cheap flannel shirt beneath. His face was a road map of sorrow, his eyes hollowed out and distant, and a multi-day growth of silver stubble covered his gaunt cheeks. He moved with a painful slowness, his gaze fixed on the floor as if the cracked linoleum held the secrets of the universe. He chose the smallest booth in the darkest corner, sinking onto the cracked vinyl seat with a weary sigh. Clara watched him from behind the counter, her heart giving a painful tug. She'd seen that look before. It was the look of someone who had lost their anchor and was now adrift in a merciless sea. Her boss, Stan Miller, a man whose soul seemed to be as greasy as the diner's grill, noticed him too. "Hey, Clara," he barked, his voice a low growl. "Keep an eye on that one. If he doesn't order in 5 minutes, give him the boot. We're not a shelter." Clara flinched but nodded, grabbing a menu. "I'll take care of it, Stan." She approached the booth, forcing her professional smile into place. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you started with something warm? Coffee?" The man looked up, and for the first time, Clara saw the deep, startling blue of his eyes. They were like chips of a forgotten summer sky, clouded with a profound sadness. He didn't seem to see the menu she held out. Just water, please," he whispered, his voice raspy with disuse. "And maybe some soup, whatever is cheapest." "The tomato soup is the special tonight," Clara said gently. "It's hearty. Comes with crackers." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. As he did, his hand trembled, and a small, worn photograph slipped from his coat pocket and fell face down onto the table. Before he could react, Clara instinctively reached out and picked it up. "Here you go," she said, placing it carefully by his water glass. His hand shot out and covered the photo possessively. "Thank you," he mumbled, his gaze dropping back to the tabletop. Clara retreated to the kitchen, her mind replaying the encounter. The raw pain in his eyes had struck a chord deep within her. It was the same pain she saw in her own mother's eyes on bad days. The same exhaustion she felt in her bones. She ladled a generous portion of the thick tomato soup into a bowl, adding an extra packet of crackers and a small side of buttered toast she wouldn't charge him for. When she brought the food to his table, he was staring at the photograph, his thumb gently stroking its surface. He didn't seem to notice her arrival until she cleared her throat softly. "Here you are, sir. Let me know if you need anything else." He looked at the tray, then up at her, a flicker of surprise in his clouded eyes. "This is more than I asked for." "The toast is on the house," Clara said with a small shrug. "Everyone deserves something warm on a night like this." He simply stared at her, and for a fleeting moment the fog in his eyes seemed to lift, replaced by a sharp, assessing intelligence. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. He just nodded and picked up his spoon. For the next hour, the old man nursed his soup, eating with a slowness that spoke of both physical and spiritual exhaustion. From behind the counter, Clara watched him. She saw the way his shoulders slumped, the way he would occasionally touch the photograph as if it were a talisman. She didn't see a bum or a problem. She saw a soul in agony. Closing her eyes for a moment, leaning against the cold steel of the coffee machine, Clara prayed. It wasn't a formal, rehearsed prayer. It was a silent, desperate plea from one tired heart to another. God, please look after him. Whatever burden he's carrying, please make it lighter. Give him peace. Let him know he isn't invisible. When the time came for the man to leave, he shuffled to the counter. He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a few crumpled dollar bills and some loose change. It wasn't enough. Not even for the soup. I'm a little short," he stammered, his cheeks flushing with shame. Stan, who had been watching like a hawk, started to move forward. "See, I told you. Get out of here, you old—" "It's fine, Stan." Clara cut him off, her voice sharp. She turned to the old man, her expression softening. "Don't you worry about it. It's on me tonight." The man looked at her, his jaw working silently. He seemed to want to say something, but no words came. Instead, he reached out a shaky hand and placed it on her arm for a brief second. His touch was surprisingly firm. Then he turned and walked out into the rain, the bell above the door marking his departure with a final, mournful chime. "You're too soft, Clara," Stan grumbled, punching the no-sale key on the register. "That's coming out of your tips." Clara didn't argue. She just sighed and started wiping down the counter, her thoughts on the stranger who was now just a silhouette disappearing into the stormy night. She felt a strange sense of peace, the kind that comes from a small, unrewarded act of kindness. She had no way of knowing that her simple prayer and a bowl of soup had just set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably alter the course of her life. The rest of the night bled into the early morning. Clara finished her shift, her body a single, unified ache. The argument with Stan had left a sour taste in her mouth, but the thought of the old man, hopefully somewhere warm and dry, tempered her frustration. After cleaning her section, she walked back to the corner booth where he had sat, a damp cloth in her hand. As she wiped down the vinyl seat, her hand brushed against something wedged between the cushion and the wall. It was a plain white envelope, thick and heavy. Frowning, she pulled it out. It was unmarked. For a moment, she thought it might belong to the man. Her heart sank at the thought that he'd lost what little money he might have had. Her first instinct was to run after him, but he was long gone. Her second was to give it to Stan to put in the lost and found, but she couldn't trust him not to open it. With a sigh, she slipped it into the pocket of her apron, deciding to deal with it in the morning. Perhaps it just held papers. The bus ride home was a blur. She let herself into the small, two-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother. The smell of lavender and medication hung in the air. Peeking into her mother's room, she saw Sarah sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady. The sight both reassured and terrified Clara. Every peaceful night felt like a temporary truce in a war she was destined to lose. Exhausted, she went to her room, tossing her apron onto a chair. The heavy envelope fell out, landing with a soft thud on the worn carpet. Curiosity finally got the better of her. She picked it up, her fingers tracing its clean edges. It felt too heavy to be just papers. With a deep breath, she tore it open. Inside was a stack of $100 bills. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She dropped onto her bed, her legs suddenly weak. She pulled the money out and began to count, her hands trembling so badly she had to start over 3 times. $10,000. There was $10,000 in cash sitting on her faded floral bedspread. A wave of nausea and panic washed over her. Where did this come from? It had to be the old man's. But how could a man who couldn't afford a bowl of soup be carrying this much cash? It had to be a mistake. Or worse, it was dirty money. Drug money. A drop gone wrong. 1,000 terrifying scenarios played out in her mind. Tucked within the stack of bills was a single, folded piece of paper. It wasn't letterhead, just a simple piece of notepad paper, torn from a spiral. The handwriting was elegant, a looping cursive that seemed at odds with the man she'd met. The note was short, its words seared into her memory, for the bowl of soup, the toast, and the prayer. You saw a man, not a problem. This is a beginning, not a payment. Do not be afraid. A friend. The prayer. He had heard her? No, she hadn't spoken it aloud. He couldn't have. It had to be a guess, a figure of speech. But the specificity of it sent a shiver down her spine. He knew. Clara sat there for what felt like hours, the money spread out before her like a forbidden treasure. This was a lifeline. This was enough to cover her mother's next round of treatments and pay off the most threatening of the overdue bills. It was a miracle wrapped in a mystery. But it also felt dangerous. Accepting it felt like stepping off a cliff. By dawn, she had made a decision. She wasn't going to the police. They'd confiscate the money, file it away as evidence in a case that would never be solved, and her mother would be no better off. The note said, "Do not be afraid." She decided, for the first time in a long time, to trust. The next day, she called in sick to the diner, a small act of rebellion that felt monumental. She went to the bank and then to the hospital's billing department. The relief on the clerk's face when Clara handed her a thick wad of cash was second only to the immense, crushing weight that lifted from Clara's own shoulders. For the first time, she could breathe. When she returned to work the following evening, Stan was in a foul mood. "About time you showed up. You think you can just take a day off whenever you want?" "I was sick, Stan." "Yeah, right," he sneered, "probably outspending your tips. Speaking of which, don't you be giving out any more free meals. This is a business." Clara just nodded, tying her apron. She felt different. The fear that had been her constant companion was still there. But it was quieter now, relegated to a back corner of her mind. In its place was a fragile, budding sense of hope. The week that followed was strangely normal. The old man didn't return. The diner continued its monotonous rhythm. But every time the bell on the door chimed, Clara's head would snap up, her heart giving a hopeful leap. The envelope had changed more than just her financial situation. It had reawakened her to the possibility of magic in the mundane, of grace in the grit. She found herself smiling more, a real smile that reached her eyes. She hummed as she wiped tables, her steps a little lighter. She had been given a reprieve, a glimpse of a life not defined by suffocating debt. She thought that was the end of it. A bizarre, miraculous, one-time event. A story she would one day tell her grandchildren. She was wrong. It wasn't the end. As the mysterious note had promised, it was only the beginning. The real test was about to arrive, not in a threadbare coat, but in a silent, gleaming black sedan that would pull up to the curb of the Hummingbird Diner 1 week later. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, a week to the day after the old man's visit. The lunchtime rush was tapering off, and Clara was refilling salt and pepper shakers, lost in a daydream. She was imagining a life where she could afford to take her mother to see the ocean, a simple fantasy that now felt a little less impossible. That's when the car pulled up. It wasn't the usual collection of dented pickups and sensible sedans that filled the diner's lot. It was a black Bentley, so polished it seemed to absorb the light around it. It purred to a stop directly in front of the entrance, and for a moment the entire diner went silent. Patrons craned their necks to see who would emerge. A chauffeur in a crisp, dark uniform got out and opened the rear passenger door. The man who stepped out was the polar opposite of the stranger from the week before. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with sharp, intelligent features, impeccably styled silver-streaked hair, and eyes the color of cold steel. He wore a charcoal grey bespoke suit that probably cost more than Clara made in 6 months. He moved with an air of brisk, no-nonsense efficiency, his gaze sweeping over the diner's cheap facade with a look of faint disdain. He entered the diner, the bell sounding oddly crisp and clear. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Stan, seeing money and importance walk through his door, scurried out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "Welcome, sir. Table for one?" Stan gushed, his usual gruffness replaced by an oily sycophancy. The man ignored him. His sharp eyes scanned the room, passing over the remaining customers until they landed, with unnerving precision, on Clara. He walked directly toward her. "Are you Clara Peterson?" he asked. His voice was clipped and professional, devoid of any warmth. Clara's heart began to pound. She wiped her hands on her apron, a nervous habit. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Julian Croft," he said, handing her a sleek, heavy business card. It read, "Julian Croft, Esquire Chief Counsel, Pendleton Global Enterprises. I am here on behalf of my client. He has requested a meeting with you, at your earliest convenience." Pendleton Global Enterprises. The name was vaguely familiar. A massive, multinational corporation. Clara stared at the card, then back at the lawyer. "Your client? I don't understand. I don't know anyone from a company like that." "My client prefers to remain discreet," Julian Croft said, his tone suggesting he was accustomed to not being questioned. "He was very impressed by you. If you would be willing to accompany me now, a car is waiting." Panic and suspicion warred with a dizzying curiosity. This had to be connected to the envelope. "Impressed by what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Croft's gaze was impenetrable. "By your character. We can discuss the details in a more private setting. I can assure you, you are in no trouble. In fact, this is to your distinct advantage." Stan was now hovering nearby, his eyes wide with avarice and confusion. "Is there a problem here?" Croft turned his cool gaze on Stan. "This is a private matter. Miss Peterson, will you come?" Clara's mind was racing. This could be a trap. It could be a mistake. But the alternative, to say no and spend the rest of her life wondering, was unthinkable. The note had said, "Do not be afraid." She took a deep breath, untied her apron, and laid it on the counter. "All right, Stan, I have to go. It's a family emergency," she lied, avoiding his gaze. She looked at Julian Croft. "Let's go." The walk to the car felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. The chauffeur held the door for her, and she slid onto the buttery soft leather of the back seat. The interior was silent and smelled of wealth. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the Hummingbird Diner, a place that had been her entire world just minutes before. It already looked small and insignificant. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, leaving the gritty, familiar neighborhoods behind and ascending into the hills overlooking the city, where the houses grew into mansions hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. They finally passed through one such gate, proceeding up a long, winding driveway to a breathtaking modern masterpiece of glass, steel, and stone. Julian Croft led her inside. The interior was vast and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the entire city. It was beautiful, but cold and impersonal, like a museum. He led her to a large, comfortable study, where a fire crackled in a wide stone fireplace, and sitting in a high-backed leather armchair, not in a threadbare coat but in a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, was the old man from the diner. He looked completely different. Clean-shaven, his silver hair neatly combed, the haunted, hollowed-out look in his eyes was replaced by a gentle, intelligent light. But it was him. The startlingly blue eyes were the same. He rose slowly as she entered, a kind smile gracing his lips. "Miss Peterson." "Clara, thank you for coming. Please, sit." Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her mind struggling to reconcile the man before her with the shivering, destitute figure from the diner. "You," she stammered. "It was you." "It was," he confirmed. He gestured to the lawyer. "This is Julian Croft, my legal counsel and trusted advisor. My name is Arthur Pendleton." The name hit her like a physical blow. Arthur Pendleton wasn't just some CEO. He was a titan of industry, a legendary figure, a billionaire philanthropist whose name was on hospitals and university wings. He was also famously reclusive, especially since his wife had passed away a year prior. "But why?" Clara finally managed to ask, sinking into the chair he'd indicated. "Why were you—" Arthur's smile faded, replaced by a shadow of the same sadness she'd seen in the diner. "My wife, Eleanor, passed away last year. She was my everything, my compass. She grew up with very little, and she never let me forget where we came from. She always said that money builds walls, and if you're not careful, you end up a prisoner behind them. After she was gone, I felt lost, trapped in this glass house. I was surrounded by people who wanted something from Arthur Pendleton, the billionaire. I wanted to find someone, anyone, who would see just a man." He paused, looking into the fire. "So I started walking. I left my wallet, my phone, everything, and I just walked. For days. It was a foolish thing to do, I suppose. But I ended up in your diner, cold, hungry, and feeling utterly invisible. And then you showed up." He turned his gaze back to her, and his eyes were full of a sincere warmth that melted her remaining fear. "You didn't see a bum to be kicked out. You didn't see a problem. You saw a person. You spoke to me with kindness. You paid for my meal from your own pocket. Julian's investigation confirmed your boss docked it from your tips. And—" he hesitated. "I saw you close your eyes at the counter. I couldn't hear you, but I knew you were praying. For me, a complete stranger." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. You looked like you were in so much pain." "I was," Arthur said softly, "and you offered me grace, with no expectation of reward. That, Miss Peterson, is the rarest commodity in the world. The $10,000 was a test, a small one, to see what you would do, Julian's people informed me you used it to pay your mother's medical bills the very next day. You didn't go on a shopping spree. You didn't gamble it away. You used it to care for someone you love." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Clara, I am a man with more money than I could spend in 100 lifetimes, and I am utterly alone. My wife and I never had children. My foundation gives away millions, but it all feels so impersonal. I want to do something real, something that matters. I want you to help me." Julian Croft stepped forward, holding a leather-bound portfolio. "Mr. Pendleton has instructed me to make you an offer, Miss Peterson. He is prepared to settle all of your mother's outstanding and future medical debts, in full." Clara gasped, her world tilting on its axis. "Furthermore," Croft continued, his voice now holding a grudging respect, "he wishes to offer you a position. Mr. Pendleton is establishing a new branch of his foundation, a smaller, more hands-on initiative. It will be dedicated to providing direct, immediate aid to individuals in crisis, people who fall through the cracks. He wants you to run it, with a starting salary of $200,000 a year, a car, and a fully furnished apartment near the hospital." Clara couldn't speak. The room was spinning. This wasn't real. It was a dream she would wake up from in her tiny, cramped bedroom. Arthur smiled gently. "My wife always said, the best way to find your own light is to be a lamp for others. You, Clara, are a lamp in the dark. I don't want to just give you a reward. I want to give you a bigger lamp. What do you say?" Accepting Arthur's offer was like stepping through a portal into another dimension. One day, Clara was scrubbing ketchup stains off cracked formica. The next, she was signing an employment contract in a penthouse office that overlooked the city like the perch of a god. The Pendleton legal team moved with terrifying efficiency. Within 72 hours, the mountain of debt that had haunted Clara's every waking moment vanished, paid off by an anonymous benefactor. A letter from the hospital confirmed that Sarah Peterson's care was now covered for life under a private fund. Clara wept when she told her mother. Sarah, frail but sharp, held her daughter's hand, her eyes filled with a mixture of joy and disbelief. "An angel," she whispered. "You found an angel, Clara." The apartment was the next shock. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched two-bedroom condo in a modern building with a doorman and a gym, just a 10-minute drive from the hospital. It was filled with tasteful, comfortable furniture that Arthur had his personal decorator select after asking Clara a few simple questions about her favorite colors. For the first time since she was a little girl, Clara had a room with a view that wasn't a brick wall or a grimy alley. It felt less like an apartment and more like a sanctuary. But paradise had its shadows. The first came in the form of her older brother, Mark. Mark had always been a drifter, moving from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, always with a handout for a loan he never repaid. When he heard the news, he showed up at her new apartment, his eyes gleaming with an unnerving intensity. "Clara, I can't believe it," he said, whistling as he looked around the spacious living room. "You hit the jackpot. I mean, really hit it. An old billionaire. That's the dream." "It's not like that, Mark," Clara said, her stomach twisting. "He's a good man. He's helping me. He gave me a job." "A job," Mark said, making air quotes. "Right, a job running his pet charity. Listen, sis, this is our chance. We're set for life. I've got this incredible opportunity, a tech startup, ground floor. All I need is about 50 grand to get in. With what this guy's paying you, that's nothing. We could be millionaires in a year." Clara's heart sank. "Mark, I can't. This isn't my money to throw around. It's a salary. I have responsibilities." His smile vanished. "Responsibilities? Your only responsibility is to your family. To me, I've been struggling for years while you were here. Now you get this golden ticket, and you're going to hoard it all for yourself?" "Hoard it?" she asked, her voice rising. "I've been working 60-hour weeks to keep Mom alive. Where have you been?" The argument escalated, ending with Mark storming out, accusing her of forgetting where she came from and calling her the billionaire's pet. The word stung, planting a seed of doubt in her mind. Was she? Had she just traded one form of servitude for another, more comfortable one? The second shadow was Julian Croft. While outwardly professional, Clara could feel his constant, skeptical scrutiny. He was Arthur's gatekeeper, and it was clear he viewed her as a potential threat. He arranged her training, set up her office, and provided her with resources. But his demeanor was always cold, his questions always probing. "Mr. Pendleton has taken a great personal interest in your success," he said during one of their meetings, his words perfectly neutral, but his tone laced with insinuation. "It's a unique arrangement. He has never been this hands-on with a new hire. You should be aware that any misuse of foundation funds or any action that could be construed as taking personal advantage of his generosity will be dealt with severely." The unspoken accusation hung in the air. "I'm watching you, gold digger." Clara felt like she was on display, a specimen in a jar. She threw herself into the work, desperate to prove her worth. The Eleanor Foundation, as Arthur had named it in his wife's honor, was everything he had promised. Her job was to find people like she had been, drowning in medical debt, facing eviction because of a sudden illness, or needing a single, transformative act of grace to get back on their feet. She reviewed cases, met with families, and had the incredible power to write a check that could change a life. It was deeply fulfilling, yet she felt a profound sense of imposter syndrome. The other executives at Pendleton Global, whom she occasionally met in passing, looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled contempt. They saw the former waitress, the charity case plucked from obscurity by their eccentric, grieving boss. She started dressing in the conservative business attire Julian's assistant had helped her purchase, but she still felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Arthur himself was a source of both comfort and confusion. He was unfailingly kind, acting as a mentor. He would call her into his study to discuss cases, his insights always sharp and compassionate. He seemed to genuinely value her perspective, but sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression of such intense, melancholic longing that it made her uncomfortable. In those moments, she felt she wasn't seeing Clara Peterson, but a ghost, the ghost of his wife, Eleanor. Was that all she was to him? A replacement? A project to distract him from his grief? Mark's venomous words and Julian's cold suspicions began to fester. The beautiful apartment started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. The breaking point came a month after she started. The local news, sniffing out a human interest story, ran a feature on the new foundation. They dubbed Clara the Cinderella of Pittsburgh, painting a fairy tale narrative of the down-on-her-luck waitress saved by a reclusive billionaire. The story went viral. Her face was everywhere. The attention was overwhelming. Strangers started recognizing her, some asking for money, others looking at her with envy. That evening, Mark called her, his voice slurred with alcohol. "Saw you on TV, Cinderella. Must be nice. Don't forget who your real family is when you're living in your castle." He hung up before she could reply. Clara sank onto her designer sofa, the panoramic view of the city lights feeling mocking and distant. She was surrounded by luxury, but had never felt more alone. The joy and relief of her miraculous rescue were gone, replaced by a suffocating sense of doubt and isolation. She had been given everything she had ever dreamed of, but she had lost a crucial part of herself in the process. She wasn't sure who Clara Peterson was anymore. The weight of her new life became unbearable. Clara's work, which should have been a source of pure joy, now felt like a performance. She was constantly second-guessing herself, terrified of making a mistake that would confirm Julian Croft's suspicions or disappoint Arthur. She felt the need to prove, with every decision, that she wasn't a fraud. Arthur, with the keen perception that had made him a business magnate, noticed the change in her. The light in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a guarded weariness. One afternoon, he bypassed his secretary and appeared at the door of her spacious office. "Walk with me, Clara," he said, his tone gentle but firm. He didn't take her to the boardroom or his study. Instead, they took the elevator to the ground floor and stepped out into the crisp autumn's air. His Bentley was waiting, but he waved it off. "Let's just walk," he said. They strolled through the manicured downtown parks, leaves crunching under their feet. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Arthur seemed content to just watch the people around them, businessmen hurrying past, young mothers pushing strollers, students laughing on benches. "You're unhappy," he finally stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Clara stopped walking, turning to face him. The honesty of his statement disarmed her. "I'm overwhelmed," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm so grateful for everything, Arthur. More than you could ever know. But I feel like I'm drowning. I don't belong in this world. Your lawyer thinks I'm a con artist. My brother thinks I'm his personal lottery ticket. And the whole world is calling me Cinderella. And sometimes I feel like you look at me and you don't see me." She took a shaky breath, the last part coming out in a rush. "I think you see your wife." Arthur's expression was filled with a deep, aching sadness. He didn't deny it. "In a way," he said softly, "you're right. I do. But not in the way you think." He led her to a quiet bench overlooking a small duck pond. "Clara, I haven't been entirely forthcoming with you. There's more to this story. More to why I was in that diner, and why I chose you. I think it's time you knew the whole truth." He reached into his wallet and pulled out the same worn photograph she had seen in the diner. This time he handed it to her. It was a picture of a smiling, vibrant woman with kind eyes and laugh lines, her arm linked through a much younger Arthur's. She looked warm and full of life. This was Eleanor. "Eleanor wasn't born into wealth," Arthur began, his voice thick with emotion. "She was a nurse. For most of her career, long before I had any real success, she worked at a community clinic, St. Jude's Community Clinic, over on the east side. It was a place for people with no insurance, people the system had forgotten. It was her passion." Clara stared at the photograph, a strange feeling of familiarity stirring in the back of her mind. St. Jude's. "She worked tirelessly," Arthur continued, his gaze distant. "She believed that kindness was a form of medicine, just as potent as anything you could prescribe. She would tell me stories about her patients, about their courage. She had a special place in her heart for single mothers struggling to care for their sick children. She said they were the real heroes." A cold dread, mixed with a shocking sense of recognition, began to creep up Clara's spine. Her own mother had gone to that very clinic for years, back when her illness was first starting, back before they even had a name for it. "Eleanor had this little habit," Arthur said with a sad smile. "For her favorite patients, The ones who were having a particularly hard time, she would give them a small gift, a little token to remind them they weren't alone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, delicate silver chain. Dangling from it was a tiny, intricately carved hummingbird charm, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. Clara gasped. Her hand flew to her own neck, to the identical charm that she wore every single day. It had been a gift to her mother, from a kind nurse at the clinic years ago, a nurse whose name she'd long forgotten. When her mother got too sick to wear jewelry, she had given it to Clara, telling her, "This is from an angel. Let it remind you to always keep fighting, to always keep your wings beating." "My wife gave that charm to a young woman named Clara Peterson," Arthur said, his voice now barely a whisper, his blue eyes locked on hers and shining with unshed tears. "A woman with a fierce spirit and a young daughter she adored. Eleanor spoke of her often. She worried about what would become of that little girl when she was gone. The world seemed to stop spinning. The sounds of the park, the city, everything faded away into a dull roar. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a staggering, heart-stopping finality. "The Hummingbird Diner," Clara breathed, the name suddenly taking on a profound new meaning. I work at the Hummingbird Diner." "I know," Arthur said. "Eleanor passed away a year ago. In my grief, I started going through her old journals. She wrote about your mother. She wrote about her worry for you. After I ran away from my life a few weeks ago, I found myself walking through your part of town. And then I saw the sign, the Hummingbird Diner. It felt like a sign from her. I went in on a whim, a desperate, foolish hope. I didn't know what I was looking for. And then I saw you." He looked at her, his expression one of awe. "I saw you, with her hummingbird charm around your neck, showing the same compassion, the same grace that my Eleanor showed your mother all those years ago. It wasn't a coincidence, Clara. I believe it was my wife's way of leading me to you, of telling me what I needed to do." He finally let the tears fall, tracking paths down his weathered cheeks. "This isn't charity, and you are not a replacement for my wife. You are her legacy. This is me paying a debt of kindness that was shown to my family when we were just starting out. You are not my project, Clara. You are the answer to my prayers." Clara sat in stunned silence, her fingers clutching the small silver bird at her throat. It wasn't just a random act of kindness. It wasn't a billionaire's whim. It was a circle, completed across years of struggle and heartache. It was a thread of compassion, passed from a kind nurse to a desperate mother, and then from that mother's daughter to a grieving husband bringing him home. In that moment, all the doubt, all the fear, all the feelings of being an imposter were washed away by a tidal wave of understanding. She wasn't Cinderella. She was a hummingbird, and she was finally ready to fly. The revelation in the park changed the very foundation of Clara's new reality. The gilded cage became a launching pad. The weight of expectation transformed into a mantle of purpose. She wasn't just a beneficiary of Arthur Pendleton's generosity. She was a partner in honoring his wife's memory. Armed with this newfound confidence, she returned to the Pendleton Global Headquarters, not as the timid former waitress, but as the director of the Eleanor Foundation. Her demeanor shifted. Her voice in meetings became stronger, her ideas more ambitious. She was no longer trying to fit in. She was there to lead. Her first significant act was to confront the two primary sources of her doubt, Julian and Mark. She requested a formal meeting with Julian Croft in her office. He arrived with his usual air of brisk professionalism, but Clara met his gaze without flinching. "Julian," she began, her tone calm and steady. "I know that you have had reservations about my position here. I understand. Your job is to protect Arthur and his assets. But I need you to understand something. I am not here for the money or the prestige. I am here to continue the work that Eleanor Pendleton started. She showed my family a kindness that we have never forgotten, and this foundation is my way of honoring that. I need you as an ally, not an adversary. So, you can either help me make this foundation a true force for good, or you can continue to view me with suspicion. But either way, I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Clara saw a crack in Julian's armor. He seemed genuinely taken aback by her directness and the mention of Eleanor's personal connection to her family, a detail Arthur had clearly shared with him. Mr. Pendleton explained the full context, Julian admitted, his voice losing some of its edge. "My caution was procedural, not personal. It was as close to an apology as a man like Julian Croft could manage. You have my full support, Director Peterson." From that day on, their relationship changed. He became her most valuable and loyal resource, his legal acumen and corporate savvy, helping her navigate the complex world of philanthropy. The confrontation with her brother was more difficult and far more personal. She invited him to her apartment, but this time she was in control. She let him start his usual spiel about needing capital for his next big idea. When he was finished, she looked at him, her eyes filled not with anger, but with a sad resolve. "Mark," she said, "the answer is no, and I need you to hear me when I say this. There will be no more money. Not for your schemes, not for your whims. I will help you get a real job. I will pay for you to go back to school or get counseling if you need it. I will support you in becoming a better man. But I will not enable this behavior anymore." He began to bluster, to guilt-trip, but she held up a hand. "This isn't Arthur Pendleton's money. This isn't lottery winnings. This is a legacy. A woman named Eleanor Pendleton, a complete stranger, showed our mother compassion when we had nothing. Her kindness is the reason Mum got the early care she needed. It's the reason I'm here. This job, this life, it's sacred to me. It's not a bank for you to withdraw from. I love you, Mark, but the free ride is over." The truth, delivered without malice, seemed to finally break through his layers of entitlement. He deflated, sinking onto the sofa, the fight gone out of him. For the first time, he looked not like a schemer, but like a lost, insecure man. It was the beginning of a long, difficult road for him, but it was a beginning. With her personal life settled, Clara poured her soul into the foundation. She and Arthur worked side by side, their bond deepening into a familial love built on mutual respect and a shared purpose. She brought the ground-level perspective he had lost, and he provided the wisdom and resources to turn her compassionate instincts into impactful programs. Their most symbolic project was their first. Arthur, through a holding company, purchased the Hummingbird Diner. Stan Miller, who had treated Clara with such disdain, was offered a generous but non-negotiable buyout package. He took the money and retired, grumbling about how the world had gone soft. Clara and Arthur stood together in the empty diner, the air still smelling faintly of old coffee. "It's a dump," Arthur said with a chuckle. "It's a landmark," Clara corrected, smiling. "It's where my life began again." They didn't tear it down. They renovated it. They transformed the greasy spoon into a beautiful, warm and inviting space called Eleanor's Table. It was a new kind of restaurant. During the day, it operated as a high-quality, pay-what-you-can cafe, ensuring everyone in the community could have a hot, nutritious meal, regardless of their ability to pay. At night, it transformed into a culinary training school for at-risk youth. The grand opening was a major event. The mayor was there, as were news crews. But the guests of honor were the people the foundation had helped over the past few months. The single mother who had avoided eviction, the family whose child received life-saving surgery, the elderly couple who could now afford their medication. Arthur stood to speak, but instead of giving a long speech, he kept it short. He spoke of his wife, Eleanor, and her belief in the quiet power of kindness. Then he turned the microphone over to Clara. Clara stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. She saw her mother, healthier than she'd been in years, beaming in the front row. She saw Mark, looking sober and clean-cut, volunteering as a server for the event. She saw Julian Croft standing in the back, a rare, small smile on his face. "A year ago," Clara began, her voice clear and strong, "I was a waitress in this very building. I was tired and I was scared. I believed that kindness was a luxury I couldn't afford. But a stranger came in from the rain, and he reminded me that kindness isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. It's the currency of the human heart." She looked at Arthur, her eyes shining. "This place, Eleanor's Table, is more than just a restaurant. It is a testament to the idea that one small act of grace, a bowl of soup, a kind word, a silent prayer, can create ripples that change the world. It is a legacy of love, passed from a nurse to a patient, from a daughter to a stranger, and now, from all of us, back to this community. Welcome to Eleanor's Table. May all who enter find nourishment, not just for the body, but for the soul." The applause was thunderous. As it faded, Clara knew her transformation was complete. She hadn't been rewarded with money. She had been entrusted with a mission. Years passed. The Eleanor Foundation, under Clara's leadership and Arthur's guidance, grew into one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the country. Its model of direct, personal intervention, which Julian Croft had once viewed with skepticism, became a celebrated new approach to charity. They didn't just write checks, they rebuilt lives, one person at a time. Clara never lost the perspective she'd gained behind the counter of the Hummingbird Diner. She spent as much time in the field as she did in the boardroom, sitting in hospital, waiting rooms with frightened parents, or helping families move into new homes. She had a unique ability to connect with people in their darkest moments, because she had been there herself. She was living proof that circumstances could change. Arthur Pendleton, the reclusive billionaire, found a new lease on life. He became a public figure again, but not as a ruthless CEO. He was now known as the quiet, kind old man who stood beside Clara Peterson, his face filled with pride. The foundation gave him a family and a purpose that all his billions could never buy. He was no longer a prisoner in his glass house. He was a grandfather figure to a community. Clara Peterson's health stabilized. The stress-free life and superior medical care worked wonders. She became a fixture at Eleanor's Table, a warm, welcoming presence who would sit and talk with the patrons, sharing her own story of struggle and hope. Mark, against all odds, turned his life around. Starting as a volunteer, he discovered a passion for the culinary arts at Eleanor's Table. He went to culinary school, a loan from his sister, which he meticulously paid back, and eventually became the head chef and manager of the very place where his new life began. He and Clara rebuilt their relationship, forging a bond stronger than it had ever been. One cool evening, 5 years after their first meeting, Clara and Arthur sat on the same park bench where he had revealed the truth about Eleanor. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "She would have loved you," Arthur said quietly, looking at Clara. The longing in his eyes was long gone, replaced by a deep, paternal affection. She would have been so proud of you. She's the one who started it all, Clara replied, touching the hummingbird charm that still hung around her neck. I'm just trying to keep the wings beating. A young woman, no older than Clara had been when they met, walked by, pushing a stroller with one hand while desperately trying to manage a crying toddler with the other. Her face was etched with exhaustion. As she passed their bench, a small toy fell from the stroller, unnoticed. Without a word, Clara got up, picked up the toy, and walked over to the young mother. She handed it back with a warm smile. You're doing a great job, Clara said softly. It gets easier. The woman looked up, startled, and her stressed expression softened into one of immense gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I really needed to hear that today. Clara watched her walk away, then returned to the bench. Arthur was smiling. The ripple effect was endless. A circle of compassion, started decades ago by a nurse in a free clinic, continued to spread, touching lives in ways they would never fully comprehend. Clara Peterson, the tired waitress who offered a prayer for a stranger, was no longer just a lamp for others. She had become a lighthouse, guiding lost ships safely back to shore. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that we never truly know the impact of our actions. A simple act of kindness, a moment of compassion for a stranger, can set in motion a miracle you may never see. The world can often feel dark and unforgiving, but just like Clara, we all have the power to be a light. Her story wasn't about being rescued by a billionaire. It was about the fact that her own inner wealth, her kindness and faith, was what made her worthy of that rescue. It's a wealth we can all possess. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of everyday compassion, please help us share it. Hit that like button to let us know it resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear a story of hope today. For more true life-inspired stories that uplift and inspire, make sure you subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You never know whose story will change your life next. Thank you for listening.